meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Here's where we will go. Nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile. Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill, and we are again continuing the top 10 list, this time going to France. This is going to be my list of those automotive engineers and innovators that were from France that were important during the period of the beginning of the automotive industry, around 1870 or so, up to World War I, the beginning of World War I, or 1914. So that's the time frame we're looking at. And this is this American's interpretation, and this was not an easy list to make. It was another embarrassment of riches. There's just so many to choose from. But I whittled it down to my 10, and so here's my list of the top 10 early automotive innovators that were from France. At number 10, Louis Kortlin. Now, I struggled because there were so many people I could put on this list to put Louis at number 10. Because although, I mean, he did have, his early career, was in France as far as, cars go, working, with DENON and with Clement and with Panhard and Levur, but he really made his name, across the pond in Britain, where, when he ended up, getting with Sunbeam. But he's on this list because of his engine designs. His ability to just come up with an engine that would work for any application was just uncanny. And they made it around the world. His engines wound up in many assembled cars across Europe and even in the US. During World War I, he designed a lot of the engines that were used in the Allied aircraft that helped win that particular war. Louis Kortlin, to me, he's important, and he deserves number 10 spot on this list. Number 9, Andre Citroen. He's challenging to put on this particular list, mostly because in the automotive world, a lot of his accomplishments were post-World War I. But he nonetheless had had his influence in the automotive industry prior to World War I. If I do someday a list of the interwar period, he's one of those people that would show up on both lists. But during, prior to World War I, he had already built himself quite an industrial base. His company built the steering gears for the, Titanic and the Olympic and, etc. And he originally got into the automotive industry not as a manufacturer, but as a consultant to manufacturers. First doing this, with Moore and then with others, before actually starting, to build cars himself. But he was kind of the French Henry Ford kind of person, just he wasn't tied down to any one company. He consulted for many of them, improving their manufacturing capability, and really got France's automotive industry as a whole up to speed as far as mass production, and really prepared it for World War I. And so, yeah, he's number 9 on this list. Number 8, Rene Panhard. Well, I think there's 2 main reasons why he's on this list. Number 1 was he invented the Panhard rod, which, carries his name. Also, they call it the track bar anymore, but it's a Panhard rod. Those of us who know, we know. And why he did this, because of the death of his partner. It was prolonged, but it was nonetheless because of a tumble of a car that had been racing because of just laws of physics. The body of the car, if it's not attached to the chassis, is gonna, when the chassis turns, doesn't necessarily want to turn as well. This is, you're fighting Newton there. And so he came up with that system, and that's on every car, period. It's just something that is now done industry-wide. And I think the second reason why he's on this list is because if I didn't put him on this list somewhere, all of my viewers in France would probably hunt me down into a wooden barn with burning torches. So, if I didn't put him on this list, and, just for the sake of my own safety, he's number 8 on this list. Number 7, Fernan Sharron. If anyone could be declared France's first superstar of auto racing, it would be Fernan Sharron. Now, it's true that Emil Levasseur would have probably been in that place had he survived, but it ended up being Fernan Sharron. Now, of course, after him and during that period, there were other figures. Leon Terry's one I've done a video on, and there's others. But when it comes to being the man to carry the French flag in the auto racing world, in the early auto racing circuit, it was Fernan Sharron. He was the first superstar of racing. He was known around the world and was instrumental in developing the interest, especially after he won the 1900 Gordon Bennett, of getting the whole, both sides of the Atlantic involved in car racing. So he's very influential as a race driver, and he's number 7 on this list. Number 6, Armand PUO. Armand PUO has the distinction of establishing the longest standing automotive manufacturer that still exists in the world today, and this is October of 2024 at the time of this recording, and they're still around. And he's on this list for a number of reasons. He, first of all, was one of those very first French folks, along with with the Bollée family, to really dive into the automotive industry. True, his first cars were steam powered. He was using the designs of Leon Serpollet, but he, like the DENON Bouton company, went to gas powered cars and showed France and led the way in the 1890s of how to make an automotive industry work in the country. They were a powerhouse. Peugeot was a powerhouse in industry in France at that time, and their methods that they used to manufacture, because they already knew them. They were making, for over 100 years, they'd already been making all kinds of stuff. Fabricating to forging to what, everything. So Peugeot, they led the way, really, from the very beginning in France. And Armand, he's number 6 on this list. Number 5, Camille DUGAS. Camille DUGAS was a suffragette right at the turn of the 20th century, 1900, 1901, 1902, right in that era. And she was the premier spokeswoman for the cause of women in driving automobiles around the world, first in France and everywhere. She raced cars, in some major races. She was actually one of the racers at the 1903 Paris to Madrid, that ill-fated race, and she went to boat racing like a lot of other people did as a result. But nonetheless, her example and her expression in the press, and her being a spokeswoman, as I said, for the cause for women drivers, around the world, in France, in Germany, in Britain, in the United States. She started it all, so if you're a lady and you drive a car, Camille DUGAS is the one that broke that mold, 120 years ago, so that it would be culturally acceptable. So she's number 5 on this list. Number 4, Albert de Dion. What a character Albert de Dion is. This he's one crazy French nobleman who wanted cars. He's not an engineer himself, but he hired some engineers and says, build me a car. And this is like 1882, 1883. And they're like, oh, okay. He hired a couple of toy makers. One of them was George Bouton, which is why, it's Didion Bouton. And I know George Bouton is not actually on this list, but nonetheless, Albert de Dion is on this list because he was the firecracker that got the ACF going, and it created modern automobile racing, car racing. The first governing body of auto racing, how the car racing governing bodies would work with the media, work with the press, but work with the local authorities, etc. How that would be established was Albert de DENON, who put that together. And yeah, everyone who loves car racing of whatever kind to this day, yeah, that's Albert de DENON. He's the grandfather of car racing. So he's number 4 on this list. Number 3, Louis Renault. Louis Renault started his car company in 1898, and it was not because he wanted to start making cars. It was because he made one for himself in 1898 and just showed it to his friends at a Christmas party as a Merry Christmas to me, and suddenly got orders for the thing. And the company grew. But there were things that Renault did and Louis did that other manufacturers did not, because he himself was a very brilliant engineer. He was the first to use a drive shaft to propel the car from the engine to the transmission to the wheels, instead of using chains or belts, which was what was typically done. He invented that in 1898. A few years later, he invented the modern drum brake, with the 2 shoes that expand inside the internal expanding drum brake that it's on the wheel hub. That was Louis Renault, which was the standard on cars for another 100 years, until the disc brake finally kind of took over in the 80s and 90s. So, his footprint on the automotive industry is just, it's extraordinary to this day. And so Louis Renault, he's number 3 on this list. Number 2, Arthur KREBS. Now here's a name that a lot of people haven't heard before, but how important is Arthur KREBS? Oh my word, this man was one of those Thomas Edisons of France. He designed and built submarines, torpedoes, dirigible airships. He designed the modern fire hydrant and the whole hydrant system for firefighting. He was prolific in all sorts of industries. And Arthur KREBS, after the death of Emil Levasseur, became the chief engineer for Panhard and Levasseur, and he started designing lots of things for cars that we take for granted. The pneumatic cylinder shock absorbers that you have on your car, that's Arthur KREBS. He invented those. The fact that your steering wheel actually comes from the dashboard instead of just sticking straight up out from the floor, that's Arthur KREBS. The steering gear to make it so that when you're holding that steering wheel and you're in a turn and you let it go, the car will simply by its geometry move itself back to driving straight. That's Arthur KREBS. How about the carburetor with floats in it to maintain regular, when you're accelerating, you're trying to go faster so that you get, the right amount of fuel, for acceleration, whereas less when you're not needing it. That's Arthur KREBS. He did so much inventing during his time with Panhard and Levasseur for the automotive industry, and so much of it is still impactful to the automotive industry today. He is definitely number 2 on this list. Number 1, Emil Levasseur. I couldn't think of anyone more impactful upon the automotive industry around the world who made their impact prior to World War I from France than Emil Levasseur. I just couldn't come up with anyone. He actually invented the steering wheel in the first place. We just talked about having it rigged. But the whole layout of cars, having the engine in front, central drive chain, driving a rear wheels. Okay, he came up with this in 1895, and you think that, okay, so what? Well, no, prior to that, there weren't any cars like that. Cars were either rear-engined or mid-engined, with the engine under the seat. And this, so he came up with, have the engine up front in the hood, and therefore the driver is going to sit facing forward with a passenger beside them, and then behind the driver will be another row of seats with them also facing forward. You think, well, duh. Well, no, that wasn't a duh. There, you look at cars back at that point in time, you had cars where people were facing all sorts of directions. You've got look at a Sunbeam where the driver's actually sitting to the side looking like this while he drives. Sunbeam Mabley, or you look at, an Errol Johnson with, the dog carts. You got, Via V and Do-Si-Do and all this sort of stuff. No, the platform and the overall concept of how a car should be designed came from Emil Levasseur, and he had it down by 1895. Took till about 1905 or so for everybody to just simply adopt what he established, but it happened. And so he's number one on this particular list. And so, hey, all you folks, so whatever country you're from, what do you think about it? And who would you have wanted to see? Because there's many other names on this list that weren't here. But anyway, that's what we have for you today, and I will see you next week. Peace.